In the rugged expanse of Montana's Big Sky country, where hope sometimes feels as scarce as summer rain, Sarah Mitchell's wheelchair sits beside a broken-down wagon. Once a vibrant cowgirl who could outride the best, she now watches the setting. Sun with hollow eyes and an empty stomach. Her savings gone, her spirit nearly broken. She doesn't notice the approaching horseman until his shadow falls across her face. Carter Reynolds could buy half the county if he wanted, but watching this proud woman reduced to begging for scraps awakened something in him he thought long buried. Without a word, he dismounts and approaches her wheelchair. Their eyes meet, hers wary, his gentle with understanding. Could this chance encounter between a wealthy rancher and a struggling cowgirl change both their lives forever? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah's fingers traced the familiar creases of her leather gloves, worn smooth from years of ranch work and more recently from endless days pushing her wheelchair wheels across uneven ground. The once sturdy leather had thinned at the palms, telling the story of a life dramatically divided into before and after. Just 6 months ago, these gloves had gripped reins instead of wheelchair rims. She'd been the most sought-after horse trainer in 3 counties, known for her gentle way with even the most troubled horses. The Mitchell family name had meant something then. 4 generations of ranchers who could read horses better than most people could read books. The accident happened on a clear autumn morning. Sarah had been working with a young Mustang, recently brought in from the wild. She'd done everything right, followed every safety protocol her father had drilled into her since childhood. But sometimes fate has other plans. The Mustang spooked at a rattler rearing suddenly. Sarah was thrown, her back meeting the corner of the fence post at precisely the wrong angle. The doctors had been kind but direct. T10 complete spinal cord. Injury. Their words echoed in her mind even now. You'll never walk again, but with proper support and rehabilitation, you can still live a full life. They hadn't mentioned how expensive that full life would be. Her savings disappeared first into medical bills, then into modifications for the ranch house. Her father's old truck, modified for hand controls, ate through what remained with repair. Bills, insurance helped some, but not enough, not nearly enough. The horses had to be sold one by one. First the client horses she could no longer train, then her own beloved mare, Starlight. Each sale felt like selling pieces of her soul. But pride couldn't feed her or keep the lights on. The ranch itself, mortgaged to pay for her rehabilitation, now teetered on the edge of foreclosure. Sarah adjusted her gloves, smoothing a loose thread. These gloves had once commanded respect at every ranch in the valley. Now they drew pitying glances from townsfolk who remembered how she used to be. Poor Sarah Mitchell, they'd whisper, thinking she couldn't hear. Such a shame about the accident. She was such a fine horsewoman. Was. The words stung more than any physical pain. She wasn't finished being a horsewoman. She couldn't be. The knowledge was still there. How to read a horse's ears, how to spot lameness from the slightest gait change, how to gentle a wild spirit into trust. But nobody would hire a trainer in a wheelchair, no matter how much she knew. The last light of day caught the silver wheels of her chair, casting long shadows across the dusty ground. Her stomach growled, a reminder of why she'd come to town. The food bank had already given her their monthly allotment. The diner had turned her away when she asked about washing dishes for a meal. Liability concerns, they'd said, not meeting her eyes. Sarah tucked the gloves into her lap, her fingers finding the worn spot where her father's initials were still barely visible. Never let them see you break, he used to say. She'd held on to those words through the hospital stays, through the rehabilitation, through selling Starlight. But sitting here, beside her broken-down wagon at sunset, watching the town's lights come on in windows, where families were sitting down to dinner, she wondered how much longer she could hold on. The kitchen pantry door creaked open. It's empty. Shelves a stark reminder of how far she'd fallen. Sarah's hand brushed across the dusty wood where canned peaches and preserves once lined the walls. Her mother's recipe, passed down through generations of Mitchell women. Now, a single can of beans rolled forlornly in the corner. Tomorrow's meal, if she could stretch it that far. The local newspaper lay open on her lap, employment sections circled and crossed out in an increasingly desperate pattern. She'd tried, everything within reason, and then beyond it. The feed store had been polite, but firm. They needed someone who could stack bags. The veterinary clinic claimed their insurance wouldn't cover her. Even the library, where she'd offered to read. Your children had hemmed and hawed about accessibility issues. Ma'am, we just don't have the proper accommodations, they'd say, or we'll keep your application on file. Empty words to match her empty pantry. Even the ranch work she could still do. Bookkeeping, breeding schedules, training consultations, found no takers. Her wheelchair seemed to be all anyone could see. Last week, she'd swallowed her pride and called her cousin in Idaho. The conversation still burned in her memory. I'm sorry, Sarah, we're barely making it ourselves this year. The drought, you know. She knew. The drought was hitting everyone, making an already tight situation impossible. The local church had helped at first, casseroles appearing on her porch like clockwork. But charity, like everything else, had its limits. The visits grew less frequent, then stopped altogether. She understood. There were others in need, families with children. A single woman living alone wasn't anyone's priority. Sarah wheeled herself to the window, watching storm clouds gather over the distant mountains. The ranch had never looked so neglected. Fence posts leaning, paint peeling, long grass untrimmed, where she couldn't reach it. Her father would hardly recognize the place now. Thank God he hadn't lived to see it come to this. The mail slot rattled, delivering another batch of bills she couldn't pay. Medical bills, utility warnings, mortgage, notices. They piled up like autumn leaves, each one carrying the threat of final collapse. She tried negotiating payment plans, but her credit was as empty as her pantry now. The mirror in the hallway caught her reflection as she passed, still straight-backed in her chair, still wearing her mother's determined expression. But her eyes told a different story. Hunger had hollowed her cheeks, worry had etched lines around her mouth. At 32, she looked a decade older. She'd promised her father she'd keep the ranch going, keep the Mitchell name strong. Now she couldn't even keep herself fed. The irony wasn't lost on her. Surrounded by fertile land, she could no longer work, dying of hunger in a valley known for its abundance. Yesterday, she'd seen Mrs. Henderson from church crossing the street. To avoid her, the same woman who'd once praised her horse training skills now couldn't meet her eyes. Was it guilt? Embarrassment? Or just the discomfort of seeing someone you used to respect reduced to barely surviving? The wind picked up outside, rattling the loose shutter she couldn't fix. Soon the winter would come, and with it, heating bills she had no way to pay. The thought of selling the ranch had become a constant shadow in her mind. But who would buy a rundown property from a desperate seller? She'd be lucky to get enough to rent a room in town. The can of beans mocked her from the pantry shelf. One more meal, then what? She'd have to go into town again, face the stares, the whispers, the awkward refusals. Her wheelchair wouldn't fit. Through the food bank's narrow door, she'd have to wait outside while volunteers brought out whatever they could spare. The thought made her stomach clench harder than the hunger. As the first drops of rain began to fall, Sarah closed the pantry. No. Tomorrow she'd have to try again. Tomorrow she'd have to find a way. But for now, she let herself do something she hadn't done since the accident. She cried. The sound echoed through the empty house, as hollow as her hopes for the future. Carter Reynolds stood in his study, morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the sprawling Reynolds Ranch. The deed to the property lay open on his mahogany desk, its aging parchment protected under glass. 15,000 acres of Montana's finest grazing land, built by 3 generations of Reynolds men, now his alone to steward. His finger traced the elegant script of his father's signature. Thomas Reynolds, a name that still commanded respect in every bank and boardroom from Helena to Billings. The old man had built an empire from a modest cattle operation, but he'd left Carter with more than just land and money. He'd left him with a legacy that sometimes felt as heavy as the mountain range shadowing their western pastures. A Reynolds man measures his worth by more than his wallet, his father used to say. Those words echoed through the emptiness of the oversized house, measuring Carter against a standard he wasn't sure he'd met. Sure, he'd doubled the ranch's profits since taking over 5 years ago. The Reynolds Ranch ran the finest breeding program in 3 states, their bloodlines sought after by buyers nationwide. But something was missing. He felt it most acutely during the long winter evenings when the work was done and the house grew quiet. His housekeeper, Mrs. Sullivan, had tried setting him up with various daughters of neighboring ranchers and local businesswomen. Each dinner date had been pleasant enough, but none had sparked anything deeper than polite conversation. The morning sun caught the gold leaf of the deed's letterhead, drawing his attention to the date, 1947, when his grandfather had first consolidated the separate parcels into what would become Reynolds Ranch. Below that, annotations tracked the property's growth, acquisitions in 62, 75, and most recently the Hendersons spread to the east, which he'd bought last spring. Outside his window, ranch hands moved with practiced efficiency, their routines as well orchestrated as a symphony. Foreman Jack Martinez had been with them 20 years, could read Carter's mind before he spoke. The breeding barn hummed with activity. The training rings held their daily dance of men and horses working in perfect harmony. Everything ran like clockwork, yet Carter found himself increasingly restless. At 38, he had everything his father had wanted for him, except someone to share it with. The master suite remained half-furnished, his mother's touches still evident in the curtains and artwork she'd chosen before cancer took her 3 years ago. He checked his Rolex. Another inheritance, though one he rarely wore except for bank meetings. Time for the morning roundup. His custom-tooled boots echoed through the empty hallways as he made his way to the front door, nodding to Mrs. Sullivan as she laid out his usual breakfast. Eggs, toast, coffee he'd probably let grow cold. "Mr. Reynolds," she called after. Don't forget the Cattlemen's Association dinner next Thursday. Miss Catherine Whitman asked specifically if you'd be attending." He suppressed a sigh. Catherine was perfect on paper. Daughter of his father's best friend, ran her own successful real estate agency in town, knew all the right people. She was also about as exciting as watching paint dry, though he'd never say that aloud. "Thank you, Mrs. Sullivan. I'll check my schedule." They both knew he'd find a reason to be busy that evening. His prize stallion, Thunder's Pride, waited at the hitching post, already saddled. The horse's coat gleamed in the morning light, every inch the $1,000 stud fee he commanded. Carter swung into the saddle with practiced ease, feeling some of his melancholy lift as they moved toward the east pasture. The morning air carried the scent of sage and wild grass, mingled with distant wood smoke from the ranch hands' cabins. Everything he could see belonged to him. The cattle dotting the hillsides, the stands of aspen turning golden with early autumn, even the creek that wound through the property like a silver ribbon. All this wealth, all this responsibility, all this solitude. The deed in his study proved he owned every acre, but sometimes he wondered if the land didn't own him instead. His father had taught him how to run a ranch, how to breed championship horses, how to close a deal with a handshake. But he hadn't taught him how to fill the silence that crept in when the day's work was done. Thunder's Pride picked his way along the familiar trail as the sun climbed higher. Another perfect morning on the Reynolds Ranch. Everything in its place, everything running smoothly. Carter wondered why that thought brought more resignation than satisfaction. He couldn't know that by sunset, his carefully ordered world would shift on its axis, all because of a chance encounter with a broken-down wagon and its remarkable owner. The old pocket watch felt heavy in Carter's hand as he studied the woman by the broken wagon. Its gold case caught the setting sun, reminding him of countless times he'd watched his father check it during critical moments at the ranch. Thomas Reynolds had always said timing was everything. In business, in ranching, and in doing what's right. He hadn't planned to take this route home. Thunder's pride had seemed to choose it himself, perhaps guided by some higher wisdom. Now, watching the proud set of the woman's shoulders, despite her obvious distress, Carter found himself unconsciously opening the watch's case, seeking guidance. From its steady tick, the Mitchell name clicked in his memory. Horse people, good ones. He'd heard about the accident. Who hadn't? But the reality before him was different from the gossip. The woman in the wheelchair didn't match the town's whispered tales of a charity case. Even exhausted and hungry, she held herself with dignity. The watch's second hand swept past worn Roman numerals. His father had used this same timepiece 30 years ago when making the decision to help the Martinez family after their farm burned down. Jack Martinez was now the best foreman the ranch had ever had. "Sometimes, son," his father had said, "the best investments aren't listed in any ledger." Sarah Mitchell's eyes met his, defiant despite her circumstances, too proud to ask for help even now. He recognized that pride. It was the same kind his father had admired, the kind that built the West. The watch ticked steadily in his palm, its rhythm matching the thoughts falling into place in his mind. The practicalities were simple enough. The ranch's guest house stood empty, had ever since his mother passed. They needed someone with horse sense. Their breeding program was expanding faster than their expertise. He'd seen Sarah Mitchell work with horses years ago before the accident. That knowledge wouldn't have disappeared with her ability to walk. But it wasn't that simple, and he knew it. The town would talk. The board members of the Cattlemen's Association would raise their eyebrows. Catherine Whitman would probably stop dropping by unannounced. Actually, he thought wryly, that might be a bonus. His father's voice seemed to whisper from the watch's gleaming face. A Reynolds man doesn't make decisions based on what others might think. The same words he'd spoken when Carter had wanted to try new breeding techniques that the old-timers had scoffed at. Those same techniques had now made Reynolds Ranch the most successful breeding operation in the state. The woman, Sarah, had noticed him now. She was trying to turn her wheelchair in the loose dirt, probably planning to leave before he could offer help she wouldn't accept. The watch ticked once more in his hand, decisive, like his father clearing his throat before announcing a decision. Carter snapped the watch case closed and slipped it into his vest pocket, its weight familiar against his chest. The sun was setting. Soon it would be dark, and the autumn nights were getting cold. She had nowhere to go, that much was clear from the empty water canteen and the desperate lines around her eyes. The decision crystallized, feeling as right as his father's old advice about knowing which horse to bet on. Not charity. He understood enough about pride to know that wouldn't work. But a chance, an opportunity. The ranch needed her expertise as much as she needed whatever he could offer. He dismounted slowly, deliberately, giving her time to adjust to his presence. The watch ticked against his chest, steady as a heartbeat, as he prepared to make an offer that would change both their lives. Some decisions, his father had taught him, weren't decisions at all. They were simply recognition of what needed to be done. Sarah's hands gripped her wheelchair's push rims, knuckles white with tension. The chair had become both prison and freedom since the accident, a contradiction she lived with daily. Now, watching Carter Reynolds approach with measured steps, she felt the familiar battle between necessity and pride rise in her throat. "Miss Mitchell." His voice carried the quiet authority of a man used to being heard. "Your wagon wheel's shot. Night's coming, and there's a storm rolling in." He stated facts without pity, something she found herself grudgingly appreciating. The wheelchair creaked as she shifted, its familiar sounds a reminder of everything she'd lost, and everything she still refused to surrender. "I can manage." "Mr. Reynolds." The words came automatically, a defensive reflex honed by months of declining help that came wrapped in pity. But he didn't move away. Instead, he stood quietly, studying her with eyes that seemed to see past the wheelchair to something else. "The ranch needs a breeding consultant," he said finally. "Someone who knows bloodlines, someone who can spot potential in a foal before it's even hit the ground." A pause. "I've seen you do exactly that." The wheelchair's left wheel had a slight squeak, something she'd been meaning to fix but couldn't afford. It punctuated the silence between them like a question mark. "That was before," she said, gesturing to the chair. "Horse sense doesn't require working legs, Miss Mitchell." Again that matter-of-fact tone. "The guest house is empty. Private entrance already has a ramp from when my mother was ill." He delivered the information like a business proposal, not an act of charity. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Her wheelchair would be useless in mud, and they both knew it. The storm was minutes away, but still she hesitated. The chair's armrests bore the scratches and scuffs of 6 months of independence, or what passed for it. To accept help felt like admitting defeat. "It's a business proposition," he continued, as if reading her thoughts. "The ranch will benefit from your expertise. Room, board, and salary in exchange for your knowledge." He patted his horse's neck, absently. "The chair doesn't matter. Your eyes and mind do." A gust of wind sent dust swirling around her wheelchair's wheels. She'd learned every inch of this chair, how to maneuver it through doorways, over thresholds, around obstacles. But she hadn't learned how to let it be just a tool, not a symbol of everything she'd lost. The first fat drops of rain began to fall. Carter Reynolds stood patiently, offering neither pity nor pressure. Just a choice. The wheelchair suddenly felt different under her hands, not a prison, but perhaps a vehicle to something new. Different, but not lesser. "The salary is negotiable," she heard herself say, surprising them both. "And I'll need to be able to see the horses daily, chair or no chair." A smile touched his eyes. "I wouldn't expect anything less." He moved toward her, then stopped, respecting her space. "May I help you mount? Thunder's pride is steady as a rock." The rain was falling harder now. Sarah looked at her wheelchair, companion of her darkest days, and made a decision. "Yes," she said simply, and was surprised to feel something like hope flutter in her chest. As Carter lifted her carefully onto his horse, her wheelchair folded and secured across the saddle, she realized something. The chair had taught her limitations. Yes, but perhaps it had also taught her something about adaptation, about finding new ways forward when the old paths were closed. Maybe, just maybe, this was one of those new paths. The guest house bedroom was larger than her entire ranch house kitchen. Sarah wheeled slowly through the space, taking in details that spoke of both luxury and thoughtfulness. Wide doorways, smooth hardwood floors, grab bars discreetly installed beside a specially modified bathroom. Someone, Carter's mother, she, assumed, had once needed these same accommodations. Moonlight filtered through gauzy curtains, illuminating built-in bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes about horses, breeding, and ranch management. A desk beneath the window overlooked the breeding barn, its surface clean and waiting. Not a temporary shelter, but a workspace, a place of purpose. "Mrs. Sullivan stocked the kitchen," Carter said from the doorway, maintaining a respectful distance. "She'll be by in the morning to show you where everything is. The ranch hands start at 6, but you can set your own schedule." Sarah nodded, noting how he didn't hover or ask if she needed help. "I'd like to start at 6 as well. No point in keeping different hours than the people I'll be working with." A slight smile touched his lips. "Jack Martinez, our foreman, will meet you at the breeding barn. He's skeptical of change, but he respects knowledge. Show him what you know, and you'll have no stronger ally." After he left, Sarah explored her new space with growing wonder. The closet had been modified with lowered bars and drawers. The bathroom vanity had space underneath for her wheelchair to roll up close. Even the window latches were positioned at an accessible height. A soft knock at the door revealed Mrs. Sullivan, a practical-looking woman in her 60s. "I thought you might want some tea before turning in," she said, wheeling in a small cart. "And perhaps a few answers that Mr. Reynolds was too male to think of providing." Sarah found herself warming to the housekeeper's direct manner. Over tea, she learned the rhythms of the ranch, when meals were served in the main house, which ranch hands were reliable, which were prone to swagger more than work. Mrs. Sullivan wielded gossip like a master artist, painting a picture of ranch life with deft strokes. The last breeding consultant was all papers and pedigrees, she confided. Didn't know a horse from a hole in the ground when it came to actual animals. Near ruined our best bloodline before Mr. Reynolds let him go. She fixed Sarah with a knowing look. You're not that type, are you? No, ma'am, Sarah replied. I believe in paperwork, but I trust my eyes more. A horse tells you everything you need to know if you know how to look. Mrs. Sullivan nodded approvingly. You'll do, then. Just, she hesitated. Don't let the talk in town bother you. They'll say things, assume things. People always do. I've heard it all before, Sarah said quietly, thinking of the whispers that had followed her wheelchair through town. Not like this, you haven't. A single woman living on a wealthy widower's ranch. Mrs. Sullivan shook her head. But Mr. Reynolds won't care what they say, so neither should you. He's his father's son that way. Does what he thinks is right, lets the gossips choke on their own tongues. After Mrs. Sullivan left, Sarah wheeled to the window. The breeding. Barn lights were still on, shadows moving as night crews tended to the horses. Beyond that, the vast expanse of Reynolds Ranch stretched into darkness. Different from her small family ranch, but the night sounds were the same. Horses nickering, wind in the grass, the distant howl of a coyote. She touched the desk's smooth surface, imagining it covered with breeding charts and foaling schedules. Not charity, but work, real work that she could do, wheelchair or not. The knowledge was still there, waiting to be used. Tomorrow would bring challenges, proving herself to Jack Martinez, learning new systems, finding her place in this sprawling operation. But for the first time in months, she felt the stirring of something like purpose. The guest house, with its thoughtful adaptations, wasn't just offering shelter, it was offering a future. The modified foaling kit, beside Sarah's wheelchair, represented her first week of innovation at Reynolds Ranch. A long-handled stethoscope for checking mare heartbeats from her chair level, extended measuring tools for checking leg angles on newborn. Foals, a custom-built shelf on her wheelchair's arm that held her notebook at the perfect angle for writing while observing. Jack Martinez eyed the modifications with growing respect as Sarah demonstrated how she could check a mare's vital signs without leaving her chair. Never seen it done that way before, he admitted, his weathered face thoughtful. But it works just fine, doesn't it? Different doesn't mean worse, Sarah replied, making notes about the pregnant mare's condition. Just means finding another way to get the same results. The mare, a valuable quarter horse named Midnight's Lady, stood quietly as Sarah wheeled around her, checking angles and muscle development. A week ago, the horse had shied from the wheelchair. Now she barely flicked an ear at its approach. Tell me what you see, Martinez, Sarah said, gesturing to the mare's flank. She'd learned quickly that the best way to earn the foreman's respect was to share knowledge, not just display it. Jack stepped closer, squinting. Well, she's carrying low. Due soon, I'd say. Look at her spine, just above the hip. Sarah handed him her modified measuring tool. See how it dips slightly, and the way she's shifting her weight? Understanding dawned in the foreman's eyes. Twins? Sarah nodded. We'll need to monitor her closely. Second twins often weaker, might need help positioning during birth. She made another note, her modified clipboard steady on her wheelchair shelf. I'd like to move her to the front stall, where I can check her easily during the night. I'll have Miguel do it right away. Jack paused, then added gruffly, Good catch. We lost a mare and twins last season, before you came. Didn't spot the signs in time. The words warmed her more than any effusive praise could have. Jack Martinez wasn't a man who admitted mistakes easily. His acknowledgement was a turning point, and they both knew it. As if to underscore the moment, Carter appeared in the barn doorway. He'd developed a habit of checking in regularly, but always with a legitimate ranch matter to discuss. Never hovering, never showing concern about her capabilities. "How's our investment looking?" he asked, nodding toward Midnight's lady. "Twins," Sarah reported. "We'll need to adjust the foaling schedule, have someone on watch round the clock when she gets closer." Carter absorbed this without surprise. "Make whatever arrangements you need. The mare's bloodline is too valuable to risk." He turned to Jack. "What do you think about moving some of the yearlings to the east pasture?" Sarah mentioned they need more hill work to build muscle. The casual mention of her input in ranch decisions didn't escape Sarah's notice. Nor did she miss the way Jack nodded thoughtfully instead of bristling at suggestions from a newcomer. "Might be right about that," the foreman agreed. "Some of them colts are looking soft in the hindquarters. Hills would fix that right quick." Later, as Sarah organized her modified tools in the breeding barn's office, her office now, she reminded herself, she reflected on how much had changed in a week. The ranch hands no longer stared at her wheelchair. Instead, they sought her opinion on mare conditions and breeding pairs. Her modified tools had gone from curiosities to accepted equipment. Through the window, she could see Carter walking the paddock with a potential buyer. He moved with the same quiet confidence she remembered from years ago, when their paths had occasionally crossed at horse shows. But there was something different about him now, a quality she couldn't quite name. The modified measuring tool in her hands caught the afternoon light. She'd sketched the design one sleepless night, remembering how her father used to check leg angles on newborn foals. Carter had taken one look at her rough drawing and had his ranch mechanic make it the next day. "Time's wasting," he'd said when she'd tried to thank him. "We've got horses that need tending." That simple statement had done more for her confidence than any amount of praise or sympathy could have. Sarah placed the tool in its custom holder on her wheelchair, another of her designs brought to life. Different didn't mean worse, she reminded herself. Sometimes it just meant finding a better way to do what needed to be done. The leather-bound notebook in Sarah's lap contained 15 years of horse training wisdom, its pages dog-eared and coffee-stained from countless pre-dawn training sessions. Her father had started it, and she'd continued the tradition, documenting every insight, every breakthrough, every subtle sign that could make the difference between a good horse and a great one. Now, as she reviewed her notes by lamplight in the breeding barn office, a new entry was taking shape. Thunder's Pride offspring showing consistent high-stepping gait at 2 months, possible genetic marker linked to Dam's bloodline, cross-reference with Diamond Star's foals from 23. "Still at it?" Carter's voice came from the doorway. She'd noticed he worked late too, though he was careful to make his evening barn visits seem casual, just updating the breeding predictions. Sarah showed him the notebook's latest page, where she'd sketched the distinctive leg action she'd observed. "In the newest foals, your prize stallion is throwing some interesting traits when paired with the Morgan bloodlines." He pulled up a chair, genuinely interested. "Show me." Sarah flipped back through her notes, finding an earlier entry. "See here? 3 years ago I worked with a colt that had the same movement pattern. His Dam's grandsire came from the same line as your new Morgan mares." She traced the lineage with her finger. "It's not just coincidence, it's a pattern we could develop." Carter studied the detailed sketches and observations. "You've been keeping records like this your whole career?" "My father started it. Said a good horse person's memory isn't in their head, it's in their notes and their eyes." She smiled at the memory. "He could tell a horse's whole history just by watching it move for 5 minutes, like you did with Midnight's Lady and the twins," Carter observed. "That save alone was worth your first year's salary." Both foals had arrived healthy 3 days ago, thanks to Sarah's early detection and preparation. The mare was already back on her feet, twins nursing strong. Sarah wheeled to the filing cabinet she'd had modified to her height. "I've been comparing my notes with your ranch records. Your breeding program is solid, but there are patterns you haven't exploited yet." She pulled out several folders. "Look at these bloodlines from the 90s. See how the traits resurface every 3rd generation." Carter leaned in, his shoulder nearly touching hers as they pored over the documents. He noticed how their hands occasionally brushed as they turned pages. He didn't show it. The previous consultant missed this completely, he said, shaking his head. He was all about fashionable pedigrees, what was winning at the moment. Trends change. Good breeding is about understanding what's under the surface. Sarah pulled out her old show circuit records. Take your new stallion prospect, Storm Warning. Everyone's excited about his speed, but watch his ears when he runs. His ears. They flick in a specific pattern. I've seen it before. It means he's fighting. Himself probably has tension in his shoulders. Good training can mask it, but his foals might show the same tendency. Better to breed him with mares known for relaxed gaits, balance out the trait. Carter sat back, studying her with new appreciation. How long have you been noticing things? Like this, since I could walk. Sarah patted her wheelchair's arm. And now that I can't, I notice even more. Amazing what you see when you're forced to be still and watch. A comfortable silence fell between them as they continued reviewing the records. The lamp cast a warm glow over the desk, turning the moment almost intimate. My father would have liked you, Carter said suddenly. He always said the best horse people were the ones who saw what others missed. Sarah looked up, caught by something in his tone. Their eyes met briefly before both looked away. Your father taught you well, she said softly, turning back to her. Notebook. The ranch shows it. He taught me about horses and business, Carter replied, but there was a lot he couldn't teach. Some things you have to learn on your own. The weight of unspoken words hung in the air. Sarah busied herself with her notes, adding details about Storm Warning's behavior patterns. But she was acutely aware of Carter's presence, of the way he'd shifted slightly closer to see her sketches. Outside, a horse nickered in the darkness. The sound broke the moment, and Carter stood, straightening his jacket. Don't stay too late, he said. The morning comes early around here, Sarah nodded, already turning to a fresh page in her notebook. But long after he'd gone, she could still feel the warmth where their shoulders had touched, still hear the undertone in his voice when he'd spoken of learning things on his own. Her pencil moved across the paper, recording observations about horses, bloodlines, and training patterns. But her mind kept wandering to other patterns, the way Carter always seemed to find reasons to seek her opinion, how his visits to the breeding barn had grown more frequent, how his eyes lingered when he thought she wasn't looking. Some patterns, she reflected, were harder to record in notebooks. The Montana Morning Star Society pages lay open on Mrs. Sullivan's kitchen counter, its carefully worded paragraphs saying everything while appearing to say nothing at all. Reynolds Ranch continues to demonstrate its charitable spirit, the column began, providing employment to those less fortunate in our community. One hopes this admirable gesture won't impact the ranch's sterling reputation for excellence in breeding. Mrs. Sullivan's coffee cup hit its saucer with unusual force. Charitable spirit indeed, as if you haven't earned your place here twice over. She picked up the paper, shaking it in indignation. And listen to this part. Catherine Whitman was noticeably absent from the Reynolds table at last week's Cattlemen's Association dinner. They're not even trying to be subtle anymore. Sarah wheeled herself to the window, watching ranch hands lead horses to morning exercise. It doesn't matter what they print, Mrs. Sullivan. The horses don't read newspapers. No, but potential buyers do. The housekeeper's voice softened. And so does Mr. Reynolds, though he'd never admit it bothers him. As if summoned by his name, Carter appeared in the kitchen doorway. His expression, seeing the newspaper, suggested he'd already read the column. Good morning, ladies. Sarah, we have that buyer coming from Kentucky today. The one interested in Storm Warning's bloodline. Sarah nodded, grateful for the focus on work. I've prepared the breeding projections he requested, and I'd like him to see the new foals there, showing exactly the traits we discussed. But as she moved to leave, Carter stopped her with a gentle hand on her wheelchair's handle. Sarah, about the paper, it's nothing I haven't heard before, she said firmly. Shall we meet in the breeding barn at 9? His hand lingered Moment longer than necessary. 9 it is, after he left Mrs. Sullivan's side. That man's father would be rolling in his grave if he could see how these gossips are treating his son. Thomas Reynolds believed in judging people by their worth, not their circumstances, or their wheelchair. Sarah's smile held a touch of bitterness. Especially not that. Mrs. Sullivan began gathering breakfast dishes. You know what really has them stirred up? It's not the chair, dear. It's the way he looks at you. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. He looks at me like any other employee. Oh, child. Mrs. Sullivan's voice held years of observation. If you believe that, you're the only one who does. The morning paper rustled again as a breeze caught it, drawing Sarah's attention to another paragraph. Sources close to the Reynolds family express concern over recent changes in ranch management. While innovation is admirable, one must consider the importance of maintaining traditional standards. Traditional standards. The words might as well have been arrows aimed at her presence here. The Society columnist Emma Whitman, Catherine's aunt, had always been skilled at wielding implications like weapons. Through the window, Sarah could see Carter walking toward the breeding barn, his stride purposeful. He'd been different lately, more present in day-to-day operations, more likely to seek her opinion on matters beyond horse breeding. Last week they'd worked late into the evening, planning breeding pairs for the spring season. The conversation had drifted from horses to childhood memories, his hand occasionally brushing hers as they sorted through papers. "They're afraid," Mrs. Sullivan said suddenly, breaking into her thoughts. The Whitmans, the old ranch families, they had plans for Carter Reynolds, a wealthy widower with the finest ranch in 3 counties. He was supposed to marry someone like Catherine, merge the old bloodlines. She snorted, as if he were one of his own horses, to be bred for advantage. Sarah wheeled herself away from the window. He still could, nothing stopping him. Nothing except the way he watches you when you're working with the horses. Nothing except how he's smiled more in these past weeks than in all the years since his father died. Mrs. Sullivan picked up the newspaper, deliberately crumpling it. Nothing except his heart, which seems to know what it wants better than all these fine society folks. The kitchen clock struck 8:30, reminding Sarah of the coming meeting. She had work to do, horses to evaluate, breeding records to review. The gossip column couldn't change the fact that she was good at her job, that the ranch's breeding program was thriving under her guidance. But as she made her way to the breeding barn, she couldn't help wondering if Carter had read the last line of the column. One can only hope that Mr. Reynolds remembers his responsibility to maintain the standards his father worked so hard to establish. Some arrows, it seemed, found their mark whether you wanted them to or not. The carriage sat in the ranch's workshop, its elegant lines barely hinting at the modifications hidden beneath its polished surface. Carter watched Sarah's expression as she examined the specialized hand controls, the reinforced wheelchair ramp, the clever locking mechanism designed to secure her chair during travel. "I had it built in Denver," he explained, trying to read her silence. "The design is based on those European carriages for disabled veterans, but with modifications for ranch work. The suspensions reinforced for rough terrain." Sarah's hands traced the hand controls, her face unreadable. "This must have cost a fortune. The ranch can afford it." Carter moved closer, pointing out features he'd specifically requested. "The brake system can be operated entirely by hand. The seats positioned so you can see into the paddocks, for evaluating horses at a distance. And there's storage for your breeding records and equipment." She wheeled around the carriage slowly, taking in every detail. Why? The question hung in the air between them. Carter had rehearsed practical answers about ranch efficiency and accessing remote pastures. But looking at her now, those answers felt hollow. "Because you should be able to go wherever you need to go," he said finally. "Because being good at your job shouldn't mean being confined to the barn area. Because—" he hesitated, then finished. Softly, Because I've seen how you watch the riders heading out each morning. Sarah's hands stilled on the carriage's gleaming wood. I'd given up on ever driving again. After the accident, it seemed impossible. Nothing's impossible. Just needs a different approach. He opened the side panel, demonstrating the ramp's smooth operation. Would you like to try it? She hesitated only briefly before nodding. Carter stayed close as she maneuvered her wheelchair up the ramp, but didn't offer help. He'd learned that about her. The importance of letting her do things herself, of offering tools instead of assistance. The wheelchair locked into place with a satisfying click. Sarah's hands found the controls, and Carter could see her mind working, calculating angles and pressures. Her fingers wrapped around the brake lever, testing its resistance. "The horse is already hitched," he said carefully. "If you'd like to—" "Yes." The word came quickly, almost desperately. Then, more composed, "Yes, I'd like to try." Carter helped guide the horse into position, then stepped back. This was her moment. He watched as she gathered the reins, adjusted the controls, took a deep breath. The carriage moved forward smoothly, Sarah's hands sure on the controls, despite this being her first time. She guided it in a careful circle around the workshop yard, then, growing more confident, turned toward the main drive. Carter followed on horseback, far enough behind to give her privacy, but close enough if needed. The carriage moved steadily along the ranch roads, Sarah's back straight, her head high. At the top of the ridge overlooking the east pasture, she drew to a stop. From this vantage point, the ranch spread out below them. Grazing horses, new foals playing, the breeding barn in the distance. The morning sun caught Sarah's face, and Carter saw something there he hadn't seen before, pure joy. "It's different from up here," she said when he rode up beside her. "You can see how the herds move together, how the young ones cluster on the hillsides." Her voice took on the professional tone he'd grown to respect. "We should bring prospective buyers this way. Let them see the whole operation at once." "Already thinking about work?" He smiled, but his chest tightened at the sight of her renewed confidence. "The carriage's work capabilities were your selling point, weren't they?" Her answering smile held a hint of teasing. "Though I suspect that wasn't your only reason." "No," he admitted quietly, "it wasn't." The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken words. A meadowlark called from a nearby fence post. The horse stamped softly. "Thank you, Carter." She used his first name rarely, and it caught his attention. Not for the carriage itself, but for understanding what it means, for knowing that I needed the freedom to do things yourself, he finished. "I know you, Sarah. Better than you might think." Their eyes met briefly, then both looked away. But something had shifted, as surely as the carriage had given Sarah new mobility. Some barrier, some careful distance they'd maintained, had begun to crumble. "We should head back," Sarah said finally. "That Kentucky buyer will be here soon." She gathered the reins, but paused. Would you ride with me a while longer?" "As long as you'd like," Carter replied, and they both knew he wasn't just talking about the ride. The kitchen in the main house glowed with evening warmth, the remains of dinner still on the table between them. Mrs. Sullivan had left a pot of coffee warming and strict instructions not to clean up. She'd handle it in the morning. Sarah suspected the housekeeper's timing wasn't entirely coincidental. Carter poured them each a fresh cup, the familiar routine feeling different somehow in the quiet evening hours. The successful sale of Storm Warning's first offspring had put them both in a celebratory mood, though neither had suggested moving to the formal dining room. The kitchen, with its well-worn table and comfortable atmosphere, suited them better. "Dad would have loved seeing those foals," Carter said, passing Sarah the cream. "He always said breeding was more art than science, but you've managed to make it both." Sarah added cream to her coffee, noting how naturally they'd shifted to more personal conversation. "My father was the same way. He used to say bloodlines were just the beginning. You had to see the heart in a horse." "Tell me about him." Carter's question was gentle, interested. Sarah's hands curled around her coffee cup, drawing comfort from its warmth. "He was magical with horses. Could gentle the wildest stallion, help the most nervous mare? After my mother died, the ranch became his whole world. She paused, remembering, and mine. But he taught you everything he knew. It wasn't a question. Everything about horses. She smiled slightly. Less about life. He didn't know what to do with a teenage daughter, so he taught me what he did know: breeding, training, the business side of ranching. I was keeping the books by 15. Carter nodded, understanding. My father was similar. After Mom's first cancer scare, he threw himself into expanding the ranch, as if building something bigger could keep the bad things away. Did it work? No. Carter's voice softened. But it gave him purpose. When she finally passed, having the ranch probably kept him going, like your father with his horses. Sarah wheeled slightly back from the table, turning to face the window. The evening light painted the kitchen in soft golds and shadows. I was so angry after the accident, she admitted. Not at the horse, not really, but at myself, at fate. I'd promised Dad I'd keep the ranch going, keep his legacy alive. Instead, I nearly lost everything. Sarah. Carter's voice drew her attention. Back. Look what you're doing here. The breeding program's never been stronger. Those foals you helped birth last week, they're carrying your expertise forward, your understanding of bloodlines and temperament. That's a legacy too. Their eyes met across the table, and something shifted in the air between them. Sarah became acutely aware of how intimate the kitchen felt, how the coffee's warmth seemed to mirror something growing in her chest. I should thank you, she said softly, for seeing past the wheelchair, for giving me a chance to rebuild something. Carter stood, moving around the table to face her directly. I didn't give you anything. You earned your place here. The chair, it's part of you now, yes, but it's not all of you, not even close. His hand rested on the table near hers, not quite touching. You know what I see when I look at you, Sarah. I see someone who understands horses the way I always wished I could. Someone who faces every challenge with grace and determination. Someone who, he paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. Someone who makes this ranch feel more like home than it has in years. Sarah's heart thundered in her chest. Carter, I know there's talk in town, he continued quietly, about why I hired you, about what it means to have you here. They think they know what's best for the ranch, for its reputation, for me. And what do you think? Sarah barely breathed the words. Carter's hand moved, finally covering hers. I think some things matter more than reputation. Some things are worth any amount of gossip. The touch of his hand sent warmth spreading through her entire body. Everything felt suspended. The evening light, the coffee's steam, their shared breath. We should be practical, Sarah whispered, but didn't pull her hand away. The ranch is thriving. Because of you, because of us working together. His thumb traced a gentle pattern on her wrist. Maybe it's time to admit that's not all that's growing here. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility and terror and hope. Outside, a horse nickered in the gathering dusk. The sound broke the spell enough for Sarah to find her voice. I'm still who I am, she said. The chair, the limitations, part of who you are. Carter knelt beside her wheelchair, bringing them eye to eye. And who you are is exactly who I want to know better, if you'll let me. The kitchen's warmth wrapped around them like a blanket, and Sarah felt something inside. Her unlock, a door she'd thought permanently closed after the accident. Yes, she said simply. I'd like that. His smile lit the growing darkness, and their fingers remained intertwined as night settled over the ranch, promising new beginnings neither had dared to imagine. The legal document arrived by courier on a clear autumn morning, its heavy cream envelope bearing the letterhead of Preston and Wells, the Reynolds family attorneys for 3 generations. Sarah watched from the breeding barn as Carter read it, seeing the subtle shift in his posture that spoke of trouble. She didn't have to wait long to learn why. Carter appeared in her office doorway, the papers gripped tight enough to wrinkle. They're invoking the trust conditions, he said without preamble. The Board of Trustees is challenging my management decisions. Sarah's heart clenched, but she kept her voice steady. What trust conditions? When Dad died, he left provisions. Carter dropped the document on her desk. The ranch's major decisions require board approval. My uncle Richard, Catherine's father, James Whitman, and 2 other old family friends. They're claiming I've made unauthorized changes to ranch operations. Sarah scanned the legal language, her stomach turning. They're specifically questioning the breeding program changes, my changes. It's not about the breeding program. Carter's voice held barely contained anger. They're using that as an excuse. Richard ran into me at the bank yesterday, made it pretty clear what this is really about. Us, Sarah said it quietly, factually. They're threatening to freeze ranch accounts if I don't return to traditional management approaches. His laugh held no humor. Apparently that includes my personal life. Richard was kind enough to remind me that Catherine Whitman is still unattached. Sarah wheeled herself to the window, needing distance to think clearly. Below, ranch hands moved through their morning routines, unaware of how their world might be about to change. The breeding program is showing record profits, she said finally. The books prove it. This isn't about profit. It's about control. Carter moved behind her, his reflection appearing in the window glass. They've never forgiven me for not marrying Catherine after Mum died. Now they're using Dad's trust to force the issue. Sarah's fingers found the worn spots on her wheelchair's armrests, drawing strength from their familiarity. What happens if they freeze the accounts? Operation stop. No feed purchases, no payroll, no facility maintenance. He rested a hand on her shoulder. I won't let that happen. This is my ranch now, not theirs. Is it? Sarah turned to face him, holding up the document. These provisions seem pretty clear, and they're not entirely wrong. I have changed things. Maybe too much, too fast. Sarah, don't. We have to be practical. The word tasted bitter now. The ranch employs dozens of people. Their families depend on those paychecks. We can't let personal feelings jeopardize that. Carter knelt beside, her chair taking her hands in his. This is exactly what they want, to make you doubt yourself, doubt us. Everything you've done here has made the ranch stronger, but at what cost? Sarah pulled her hands away gently. Your father built this place, his legacy, his dreams for its future. Maybe his trustees understand those better than we do. Dad's legacy isn't about maintaining some social order. It's about excellence, about doing what's right. Carter's voice roughened. He taught me to judge people by their character, their abilities. If he could see what you've done here, but he can't. Sarah gestured to the document, and the people who can are telling you I'm a mistake. The morning sun streamed through the window, catching the official seals and signatures on the trust papers. Such small things to hold such power. I should go, Sarah said quietly, before this gets worse. No. Carter's response was immediate, fierce. We'll fight this. I'll get other lawyers, challenge the provisions, and risk everything your father built. Sarah shook her head. I won't be the reason this ranch suffers. I won't be the reason you lose your inheritance. She wheeled toward the door, her heart breaking with each turn of the wheels. I'll have my things out of the guest house by evening. Sarah, please. But she was already moving down the hallway, leaving Carter with the damning document and the weight of generations of expectations pressing down on his shoulders. Sarah's few possessions fit into 2 bags, now sitting beside her wheelchair in the guest house entryway. Her notebooks, 15 years of horse training wisdom, remained stacked on the desk. Those belonged to the ranch now. She'd leave them where they could do the most good. The sound of bootsteps on the porch made her straighten her spine. She knew those steps, had come to anticipate them each evening, but this time they carried a different weight. Don't do this. Carter stood in the doorway, his figure blocking the late afternoon light. Please. It's already done. Sarah gestured to the bags. Mrs. Sullivan called a taxi. It'll be here in an hour. I won't accept your resignation. You don't have a choice. She wheeled past him onto the porch, needing air, escape, anything to dull the ache in her chest. The trust document made that clear enough. Carter followed her out. To hell with the document. To hell with all of them. This is my ranch. No. Sarah turned to face him. This is your father's legacy, his dream. Everything he built, everything he wanted for you, it's all here. I won't be the reason you lose it. You think this is what he wanted? Carter's voice cracked. For a bunch of old men to dictate my life, to force out the best horse trainer this ranch has ever seen because she doesn't fit their social expectations? I think he wanted his son to have a future, security, position. The words felt like glass in her throat. Not scandal, not whispers. Not a crippled wife who needs ramps and special carriages just to do her job. Wife? The word hung between them, making Sarah realize what she'd inadvertently revealed. It doesn't matter now. She moved toward her bags, but Carter stepped in, front of her chair. It matters. It all matters. He knelt beside her, one hand gripping her wheelchair's arm. You think I care about their money, their social position? Sarah, look at me. She couldn't. Looking at him would break her resolve, and she needed to be strong. For both of them. The breeding barn office is organized, she said instead. All the records are updated. Spring breeding recommendations are in the blue folder. Storm warnings, lineage projections. Stop. His hand found hers, gripping it. Stop acting like you're just an employee. Stop pretending this is just about the ranch. The ranch is everything. Finally, she met his eyes. It's your heritage, your future. Those trustees, they're right about one thing. You need someone who can stand beside you at social functions. Someone who can dance at charity balls and charm investors. Someone who can give you children to inherit all this. I need someone who sees me. Carter's voice roughened. Not the Reynolds name, not the ranch's reputation. Me, and you're the only one who ever has. Sarah pulled her hand free. Sometimes love isn't enough. It is, if we fight for it. He stood, pacing the porch. You think Dad's legacy is about maintaining some social order. His real legacy was courage. The courage to build something from nothing. To stand up to people who said he was reaching too high. He stopped, facing her. The courage to love who he chose, not who society picked for him. What do you mean? My mother was a school teacher. No money, no social standing. The trustees. Back then, different men, same attitudes, tried to stop the marriage, said she wasn't suitable for a Reynolds. His smile held bittersweet memory. Dad told them either they accepted his choice or he'd sell every acre and move to California. The packed bags seemed to mock them from the doorway, their presence a reminder of choices yet to be made. I'm not asking you to take on these battles, Sarah whispered. It's not fair to you. Life isn't fair. Carter knelt again, taking both her hands. But love is about choosing your battles. And you, Sarah Mitchell, are the one battle I won't walk away from. The taxi's honk from the distant driveway shattered the moment. Time had run out. Choose, Sarah, Carter said softly. But choose for us, not for them. Mrs. Sullivan appeared at the guest house door like an avenging angel, clutching a worn leather portfolio. Before either of you does something foolish, she announced, there's something you need to see. The taxi's horn sounded again in the distance. Tell him to wait, Mrs. Sullivan commanded Carter. This is more important. Sarah watched as the housekeeper set the portfolio on the table, her movements deliberate. I've worked here 30 years, she said, untying the leather straps. Your father trusted me with these, Carter. Said there might come a day when you'd need them. Inside lay bundles of letters, their paper yellowed with age. Carter picked up the first one, his father's bold handwriting instantly recognizable. To the Board of Trustees, he read aloud, regarding the provisions of ranch management and succession. He looked up sharply. These are Dad's letters to his lawyers, from before he died. Keep reading, Mrs. Sullivan urged. Sarah wheeled. Closer, as Carter continued, while I understand the board's desire to maintain traditional oversight, I am hereby amending the trust conditions. My son Carter has proven himself not just capable, but exceptional in his management of Reynolds Ranch. More importantly, he has shown the one quality I value above all others: the wisdom to recognize true worth in people, regardless of their circumstances. His voice faltered. Sarah reached for his hand, both of them drawing strength from the contact. The breeding program's success, Carter read on, will be measured by results, not methods. The ranch's social standing will be judged by its integrity, not its adherence to outdated social codes. And my son's personal choices will be his own, as mine were mine. Mrs. Sullivan pulled out another letter, this one addressed directly to Carter. He wrote this the week before he died, never had a chance to give it to you. Carter's hands shook slightly as he opened it. Son, by now you've likely faced challenges from the board. They mean well, but their vision is locked in the past. The Reynolds name wasn't built on following others' rules. It was built on recognizing opportunity where others saw only obstacles. I've watched you grow into a man who understands this. You see people for who they are, not what others label them. Like when you promoted Jack Martinez, despite the board's concerns about his background. You saw his worth, his expertise, not his circumstances. I'm adding this letter to the trust documents. The board's power extends only to financial oversight. They cannot dictate hiring decisions, breeding programs, or personal matters. Any attempt to do so violates the trust's true purpose, to ensure the ranch's growth through innovation and integrity. Most importantly, son, they have no say in matters of the heart. I married your mother against their wishes and never regretted a day. The right person brings out the best in us, challenges us to grow, shares our dreams while adding their own vision. When you find that person, and you'll know when you do, don't let anyone's expectations stand in your way. Choose with your heart, son. The rest will follow. Love, Dad. Sarah felt tears on her cheeks. Carter wasn't even trying to hide his. There's more, Mrs. Sullivan said, pulling out legal documents. The actual trust amendments, properly filed, all legal. The board's oversight is limited to financial review only. They can't freeze accounts without proving mismanagement, and the breeding program's success makes that impossible. Why didn't you show us these earlier? Carter asked, but his tone held no accusation. Mrs. Sullivan smiled. Sometimes people need to decide what they'll fight for before they know if they can win. Your father understood that. She turned to Sarah. He would have liked you, dear, would have recognized another person who sees beyond surfaces to what matters. The distant taxi honked again, more insistently. Carter. Sarah's voice was steady now. Send him away. He was already moving, hope lighting his features. You're staying? I'm staying. She gripped the arms of her wheelchair, feeling strength flow through her. We have a fight ahead of us. Yes, we do. His smile was fierce with joy. And we have Dad's blessing to wage it. Mrs. Sullivan gathered the letters carefully. I'll just file these where they belong, in your father's study. Next board meeting might be interesting. After she left, Carter knelt beside Sarah's chair. Still worried about the ranch's legacy? Sarah touched the letters gently. I think I understand it better now. It's not about maintaining what was. It's about building what could be. Together, she smiled. After all, we have breeding programs to revolutionize, traditions to challenge, and apparently a board meeting to scandalize. Carter laughed, the sound full of freedom and possibility. Outside, the taxi's engine started up, then faded into distance, taking with it the weight of other people's expectations. The partnership agreement lay on the boardroom table like a gauntlet thrown. Sarah's name, printed boldly beside Carter's as co-director of breeding operations, seemed to draw every eye in the room. Uncle Richard's face had turned an interesting shade of purple. This is unprecedented, James Whitman spluttered, while his daughter Catherine maintained a frozen smile. The Reynolds Ranch has always been managed by people who understand horses, Carter interrupted smoothly. By people who can read bloodlines, predict traits, and build successful breeding programs. He gestured to the quarterly report spread before them. The numbers speak for themselves. Sarah wheeled forward, her specially modified chair allowing her to reach the table at its full height. Profits up 38%, she noted calmly. Successful foaling rate increased by 20%. 3 new breeding contracts with Kentucky's top stables. Numbers aren't everything, Richard cut in. There's tradition to consider, reputation, social standing. Carter's voice held an edge. Let's discuss that. Our reputation among actual horse people has never been higher. The waiting list for our breeding program is 2 years long. Even the Whitman stables, he nodded to James, have requested our services at full price. Catherine's smile slipped slightly. James shifted uncomfortably. The partnership agreement is already filed, Carter continued. Sarah's expertise is now legally tied to the ranch's operations. Any attempt to interfere would breach the trust's explicit provisions regarding ranch management. Your father, Richard began, would be proud. Sarah's quiet voice cut through the tension. Proud that his son chose expertise over expectations. Proud that Reynolds Ranch is leading the industry in innovative breeding practices. Proud that tradition is being honored through excellence, not mere repetition. She pulled out her breeding notebook, its pages documented with years of observations. Would anyone like to discuss the actual breeding program? The genetic markers we're tracking? The temperament patterns we've identified? Her smile was polite, but challenging. Or shall we stick to vague concerns about social standing? The silence was deafening. None of the board members had actual experience with horse breeding. Their power had always been social, not practical. I move to approve the partnership agreement, said the 4th board member, an elderly judge who had been quiet until now. My daughter bought one of your new foals. Best horse she's ever owned. Breeding like that doesn't come from following old rules. Richard's face darkened. Now see here. No, Uncle Richard, you see. Carter stood, his hand resting supportively on the back of Sarah's chair. This partnership isn't up for debate. The only question is whether you want to be part of Reynolds Ranch's future or cling to an imagined past. Catherine stood abruptly. This is absurd, Carter. Surely you can't mean to... To what? Sarah asked mildly. To prioritize the ranch's success over social expectations, to choose a partner based on ability rather than ancestry. She wheeled slightly forward. To love someone who sees him for himself, not his name. The room fell silent again. Carter's hand squeezed her shoulder. Gently, the trust is clear, the judge said into the quiet. Management decisions rest with Carter. Financial oversight is our only purview. He smiled slightly. And given these profit margins, I'd say management is doing just fine. Then we're done here. Carter's voice was firm. The partnership stands. Sarah and I will continue modernizing. The breeding program, the ranch's reputation will rest on our results, not your approval. One by one, the board members gathered their papers. Catherine was the first to leave, her heels clicking angrily on the hardwood floors. James followed, pausing only to mutter, Your father would never have allowed... My father, Carter cut in, left very clear instructions about allowing me to choose my own path and my own partner. He met Sarah's eyes. In all things, after. They were alone. Sarah released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Think we scandalized them enough? Carter knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. I think we just began. Wait until they get the wedding invitations. She laughed, then sobered. You're sure about this? All of it? The partnership agreement? Isn't just about the breeding program. He touched her cheek gently. It's a promise to build something together, to face whatever comes as equals, whether they like it or not. Sarah looked at the agreement, their names side by side. Partners, she said softly. In everything, he agreed, and kissed her, right there in the boardroom, where traditions had just been thoroughly upended. Outside, a spring breeze carried the sound of nickering horses and new possibilities. The ranch was changing, growing, becoming something new, just like them. The wedding ring caught the morning light as Sarah turned it in her fingers, studying the unique design. Unlike traditional bands, this one bore an engraving of a horse in full gallop, its lines flowing seamlessly into words. Different paths, same journey. Carter had designed it himself, working with a craftsman who understood that some symbols needed to be as unique as the love they represented. "Ready?" Mrs. Sullivan appeared in the guest house doorway, now Sarah's dressing room one last time. The housekeeper's eyes were suspiciously bright as she wheeled in a full-length mirror. "Let's make sure everything's perfect," Sarah smoothed the specially designed dress that draped elegantly over her wheelchair. No attempt to hide it, the chair was part of who she was. And today was about celebrating truth, not maintaining appearances. "The horses are ready," Mrs. Sullivan continued, adjusting Sarah's veil. "Jack has them decorated just as you asked. Though I still can't believe you're having the ceremony in the breeding barn." "Where else?" Sarah smiled. "It's where we really found each other. Besides, can you imagine trying to navigate a church aisle in this chair?" The breeding barn had been transformed. Sunlight streamed through windows, freshly washed by ranch hands who'd insisted on doing it themselves. The central aisle, usually reserved for leading prize stallions, was lined with wildflowers. And in the stalls on either side, the ranch's finest horses watched with curious eyes, adding their own occasional commentary to the proceedings. "Carter's pacing by the north paddock," Mrs. Sullivan reported. "Handsome as sin in that suit, though. He keeps checking on Thunder's pride like the horse might forget his part." The stallion had been specially trained for this day, learning to walk slowly beside Sarah's wheelchair, a unique interpretation of the traditional walk down the aisle. Some guests might raise eyebrows, but this was their way, blending tradition with innovation, finding new paths to old destinations. "The guests are arriving," Mrs. Sullivan continued, "and yes, Richard and the Whitmans came, looking sour as green apples, but they came. Judge Matthews is keeping them in line with stories about his daughter's new foal, the one from our breeding program." Sarah slipped the ring onto her bouquet for safekeeping. "Any word from my old ranch? Jack sent some hands over yesterday, fixed the fences, mended the roof. It'll be ready when you want to visit." Mrs. Sullivan's voice softened. "Your father would be proud seeing you today. Both your fathers would." The sound of guests gathering filtered through the windows. Sarah wheeled to the door, then stopped. "Mrs. Sullivan, thank you. For the letters, for standing by us, for everything." "Oh, hush." The housekeeper blinked rapidly. "You'll make me cry and ruin my makeup. Now, let's get you married before Carter wears a hole in the paddock fence." The ceremony itself was uniquely theirs. Thunder's pride walked regally beside Sarah's wheelchair, his steps measured and proud. Carter waited by the barn's center post, where generations of Reynolds men had tied their horses and made deals with handshakes. But today wasn't about the past. It was about building something new. Judge Matthews, officiating with obvious pleasure, spoke of partnership in all its forms, of how love, like good horse breeding, required both strength and gentleness, wisdom and patience, respect for tradition and courage to forge new paths. When it came time for the rings, Carter knelt beside Sarah's chair, making them equal in height. The engraved band slid onto her finger as perfectly as a well-fitted bridle on a beloved horse. "I choose you," Carter said, his voice carrying to the rafters where barn swallows nested. "Your strength, your wisdom, your determination, your way of seeing beyond surfaces to what matters, partner in all things, keeper of my heart." Sarah's hands were steady as she placed the matching ring on his finger. "I choose you. Your kindness, your vision, your willingness to build new trails. When old paths are blocked, partner in all things, holder of my dreams." Thunder's pride chose that moment to nicker softly, drawing laughs from the gathered guests. Even Uncle Richard's stern expression cracked slightly. "By the power vested in me," Judge Matthews proclaimed, "and with the apparent approval of the finest horseflesh in Montana, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Their kiss was sweet with triumph and promise. Around them, the barn's familiar scents mingled with flowers, the sounds of horses with happy applause. It was perfect, not despite its uniqueness, but because of it. As Carter helped her wheel back down the aisle, Sarah caught glimpses of their future in the faces around them. Ranch hands grinning proudly, Mrs. Sullivan dabbing her eyes. Even the social elite of Montana looking thoughtful, as if seeing something they hadn't expected. The ring caught the light again as Sarah took Carter's hand. Different paths, same journey. They'd found their way together, and the trail ahead looked bright. The new ranch sign caught the morning sun, its fresh paint gleaming. Reynolds and Mitchell Premium Breeding Program. Below that, in smaller letters, where tradition meets innovation. Sarah paused her custom carriage beside it, watching Carter adjust the final mounting bolt. "Perfect," she called, "though I still say we could have kept just the Reynolds name." Not a chance. Carter stepped back to admire their handiwork. "This is our legacy now. Both of us." 1 year had transformed more than just the sign. The breeding barn had doubled in size, with a state-of-the-art rehabilitation center that drew injured horses from 3 states. Sarah's modified training techniques had revolutionized how handlers worked with troubled animals, proving that patience and understanding could succeed where traditional methods failed. The guest house stood empty now. They'd moved into the main house after the wedding, but its ramps remained, joined by others across the ranch. 3 new handlers had been hired, 2 in wheelchairs, each bringing their own expertise and determination. Different paths, same passion. "Speaking of legacy," Carter said, mounting his horse. The doctor called. Tests confirm it. Twins. Sarah's hand went to her belly, still flat but holding their future. Modern medicine had confirmed what her mother's heart had hoped. Her injury wouldn't prevent her from carrying children. "Think you can handle 2 little ranch hands at once? With you as their mother? They'll be running the place before they're 10. His smile held all the love and confidence that had drawn them together. "Though we might need to modify some more equipment, already designing it." She patted the folder in her lap. "I've got plans for a chair-accessible nursery, adaptive parenting tools." She grinned. "And wait until you see my ideas for teaching them to ride." Thunder's pride nickered from the nearby paddock where he enjoyed his semi-retirement. His latest offspring grazed beside him, future champions carrying the bloodlines Sarah had carefully cultivated. The ranch's success had silenced even their strongest critics. Uncle Richard had recently admitted gruffly that their innovative breeding program was possibly an improvement on traditional methods. "Ready for the buyers from Texas?" Carter asked, falling into step beside her carriage. "Breeding records are prepared, demonstrations scheduled." Sarah checked her watch, her father-in-law's old pocket watch given to her by Carter on their wedding day. "Though you know they're really coming to see if the rumors are true about the miracle breeding program," he smiled. "Or about the remarkable woman who runs it. Both, probably." She returned his smile. "Shall we give them something to talk about?" Together they moved toward the breeding barn, where their future waited in blood and bone, in tradition and innovation, in love that saw beyond surfaces to the heart of what mattered. The sign caught the sun behind them, casting a shadow that pointed forward, always forward into new horizons they would explore together. Different paths had led them here, but the journey ahead, that they would share, stride for stride, wheel for wheel, until the sunset on their final day at Reynolds and Mitchell Ranch.